The Federal Reserve leaving rates unchanged at zero.
We decided to lower
key interest rates by another half a point.
Record low of 0.75%.
What's happened with interest rates is really extraordinary.
I call it an FTD, a financially transmitted disease, and I don't think investors or the media or even the central bankers truly understand the implications.
Well, I think central banks have to really step back and ask themselves, can they really solve all of the economic problems of the world through interest rate reductions? I am quite skeptical about that.
Artificially low interest rates are the culprit in the government-created boom-bust cycle.
I think you're right to be worried about.
Interest rates have never been lower. So what? My first reaction was,
Nice.
credit is cheap, that means I can borrow more, get a bigger house and a nicer car on top. What's the problem? And then I started reading a little bit about this, which I really don't recommend, because reading tends to make you think, which is usually a lot of trouble. Anyway, I did keep on reading, and I found that. Remember that guy? If you've seen the movie Big Short, you probably do. Michael Blurry. He is one of the few who saw the subprime crisis coming back in 2007. As a hedge fund manager, he ended up making a multi-billion-dollar bet against the market, which he won. So when this guy says there's a bubble somewhere, you might want to listen, just in case. And if you keep on reading, damn, that guy is not alone.
This is a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme.
Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme.
A Ponzi scheme? Who the hell is Ponzi, by the way? Carlo Ponzi arrived in 1903 in Boston with exactly $2.50 in his pockets, because according to him, he had gambled away the rest of his money during the trip. The true definition of optimism. 16 years later, he opened his own stock company and offered investors 100% profit in 3 months. Such high returns were unseen at the time, and they were only based on a vague idea that soon proved to be completely unrealistic. New clients, however, kept on lining up at Ponzi's door, begging him to take their money. So he just did, and used this new money to pay back the older investors. New clients kept on showing up, and it went on and on and on. And everybody was happy. People wanted to see high return, and Ponzi was paying them their fat interest just on time, every time. So why worry? Obviously, at some point, the music started to slow down, and the whole scheme soon collapsed. The bottom line here is that at some point in a Ponzi scheme, even though people clearly know this is too good to be true, they go for it anyway. The hope for easy cash is just too strong. Does it sound familiar? Interest rates shouldn't be so low. Credit is too cheap, and yet nobody cares! So let's start with a simple question. Why? Why are interest rates so low right now?
Debt is used to subsidize a lifestyle that people's earnings can't pay for. When people's incomes started to stagnate in the 1970s, all of a sudden you could lease cars rather than buy them. You could buy cars with no money down.
The reason the Fed is cutting interest rates, right, is because they helped create an economy that was completely addicted to cheap money.
Lower than ever interest rates are no coincidence. They're a political choice.
The kind of economic growth that's broad-based.
And we have created 7 million new jobs.
The next question is, what's the cost of this choice?
I am so afraid of a democracy getting the idea that you can just print money to solve all problems.
We have been able to convince the people that wealth comes out of a printing press.
A printing press. That's the problem. To force interest rates down and boost spending, governments have relied on central banks to print a lot of money. Listen to the words of the chairman of the Federal Reserve himself.
You simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds
Okay, so central banks are clearly printing money. But how? Why? Focus. You're about to go through 27 seconds of complex financial sophism. 1. Government bonds. They're considered to be the safest investment possible, so they pay the lowest interest rates of all investments. Interest rates on all other items follow those on government bonds. Mortgages are a good example. 2. If bond prices go up, their interest rates goes down. Because of point 1, if bond prices go up, all interest rates go down. That's what governments want. They want low interest rates, so they want bond prices to go up. 3. What drives the price up? Demand. 4. For a decade, central banks have been buying a huge amount of bonds. This continuous demand drove bond prices up, which dragged bond interest rates down and all other interest rates along with them. Breathe. In summary, for interest rates to go down, central banks had to buy a lot of government bonds. And now, the final and most interesting bit. You ready? A central bank doesn't need to have the money first to buy bonds. It can just create the money first and buy the asset after. And that's where the money printing lies. So if the Fed wants to buy $200 billion of government bonds from Citigroup, for example, they can just credit the Citigroup accounts at the Federal Reserve with $200 billion and then buy the asset. 200 brand new billions freshly created by the Fed just for that purpose. And after that move, there will be $200 billion more in circulation in the world. This is the total amount of assets owned by the Fed over time. Here we can see all the assets they've bought, mainly bonds, which corresponds to all the new money they've created in order to buy all these bonds. Since 2008, the amount of assets held by the Fed has increased by $8 trillion. To put things in perspective, the total amount of dollars in the world in form of notes and coins is 2 trillion. So 8 trillion is no joke! And this is what's been going on in Europe and the US for more than 10 years. Governments issue debt, then their central banks print money to buy the debt back, because doing that forces interest rates to go down. So what shall we think about all this? A Ponzi scheme is an orchestrated scam where victims get robbed, desperately printing money to have the illusion of maintaining our standards of living is something else. And it reminds us of the last days of another powerful empire. During the first 220 years of the Roman Empire, the major coin in use was the denarius. It was a high-purity coin made of 90% silver and was worth approximately a day's work of a skilled craftsman. But there were too many wars and too much bread and circuses to pay for, and only so much silver. So, as an extraordinary measure, Roman emperors sometimes decided to decrease the purity of the denarius in order to forge more coins with the same amount of silver, and have a little extra money to spend. Guess what? By 265 AD, there was only 0.5% silver left in the denarius. Prices skyrocketed 1,000%, and nobody outside of the empire would accept these coins anymore. Like the Romans before, are we slowly Ponziing ourselves? Have we started to believe our own lie? That we could just, forever, print our way out of everything? We'll see. At least the good news is, at this rate, we might as well be all millionaires pretty soon.